Good morning. We are starting a little early so we can get going with this. A few comments I need to make. I've sent an email to most of you, to all of you actually, who are taking this class, telling you that you need to start uploading your information, your PowerPoint presentations. Again, you need to call me. My phone number is area code 318-470-2608. We will begin in a few minutes. I just want to do some housekeeping rules. Your grade will come, your final grade will be based off of your PowerPoint presentations. If you have not gotten them in to me, by now, you need to start getting them in to me. I need all of them. You know how many you have to do. I've given you the assignments. I've told you how to do it. I've given you instructions. You need to upload it into Jix, into your class, and your name will pop up, and I will be able to give you a grade. Now, what I want you to know that this is being monitored by the Vice President of Academic Affairs and also the consultant to know that we are doing what we need to do. So I need you to continue on doing what you are doing and to start putting your PowerPoint presentations in. Now, we're starting a little early with this presentation because we're doing many slides here. We're using chapter 5. Expanding policy advocacy across national borders. Now, we completed the one over the local and state borders, and so we want to start this time with chapter 5. We've completed chapter 4, and this is chapter 5. I will be continuing the lectures up until time of finals. And so I need you to start preparing yourselves and being ready as we go. So this is chapter 5, expanding policy advocacy across national borders. So expanding policy advocacy across national borders. What this chapter is going to do is going to broaden the horizon to include global realities and institutions as they contribute to social problems abroad, also as they contribute to social problems within the United States. Yes, we are now living in a global community. It all comprises all states, all countries, all nationalities, because all countries, all ethnicities, all cultures have what we style as social problems. And so we're going to look at how these problems, these social problems, contribute to social problems within the United States, and also how social problems contribute to other countries. All right? Globalization. Social problems in the interdependent world, meaning that we all depend upon each other. So globalization. Globalization is a massive movement in recent decades of capital, which is money, jobs, labor, and culture across national boundaries. A broad and complex phenomenon impacting economies, educational systems, health and human service systems, relations among ethnic groups, patterns of immigration, and immigration and migration, mass media, and cultures. So what's the benefits of globalization? Globalization has created jobs in many developing nations. It has fostered the sharing of technology and information across national boundaries. It has created markets for industries in industrialized nations. It has stimulated technical, technological innovation, technological innovation. Social problems in the independent world continue. The drawbacks of socialization to the United States. It has led to loss of jobs of many American workers and reduction in their pay and benefits. A lot of the mills, like the steel companies, steel mills have closed. A lot of the manufacturing companies are going overseas because what? The labor is cheaper, and American workers, they lose their jobs, they lose their pay, they have reductions in it, and also they have reductions in benefits. One of the major benefits is health insurance. It has undermined some American trade unions. It has widened the gap between well-educated skilled workers and uneducated, unskilled workers. It has sometimes degraded environmental standards and working conditions. Globalization has also increased the vulnerability of Americans to illnesses that spread across international boundaries. It has led to huge migration flows to the United States, whose members are often victimized by American employers. Another drawback, or some more drawbacks of globalization to other nations. It has destabilized economies, exposed workers to harsh working conditions, what they call sweatshops. You hear them talk about child labor in these sweatshops as well. And it encouraged child labor, like I said. It has contributed to growing inequality when they work women and those in the poor for little or nothing. It has undermined indigenous traditions with American culture, such as music, film, and food. It has increased pollution in some places. Some of the pollution increases are coming from the oil companies and other industrial companies that pour industrial waste into our rivers, lakes, and streams. They're destroying the wildlife and the seafood and animals. It has fostered rapid movements of persons from rural to urban areas in some nations. It has fostered massive migration, with some migrants occupying marginal or illegal status that accentuates their poverty in the destination nations. Policy advocates must expand their horizons to include issues and problems that cross international boundaries. If they wish to help vulnerable populations that are impacted by globalization, both at home and abroad, they need to develop social policies that will prevent or offset some of socialization's negative consequences while embracing some of its positive impacts. We're talking about social problems in an interdependent world. Globalization and vulnerable populations in the United States. Many Americans attribute their erosion or stagnation of living standards to globalization. The gap between the richest fifth and the poorest fifth of Americans has widened. The living standards of many American workers have remained stagnant during the past 5 years. many American industrial jobs have migrated to developing nations. Corporations seek higher profits by replacing American workers with low-wage workers. It began with the automobile industry in the 1960s. The textile, steel, furniture, and many other manufacturing industries followed suit. I had spoken of this earlier about the textile and the steel industries. But we also have the furniture industries and the manufacturing, the clothing industries, the textile industries, the lumber industries, and many of them, they follow suit. So here comes the free trade agreements such as NAFTA. They were signed in the 1990s. In the 1800s, there was a relatively level playing field with the entire world being impoverished. The economic gap between development and developing nations was not caused by eccentric differences between their citizens, such as in their intelligence or other innate characteristics. Instead, some nations moved forward economically because they gained access to technology that allowed them to produce and harness power, primarily from fossil fuels, such as coal and later petroleum, which is oil. This power spurred the Industrial Revolution, which allowed these nations to do what? Mass produce a wide array of products in factories, build infrastructure and develop mass transit, make machines to farm large tracts of land with relatively little labor, producing crops in mass quantities, manufacture ships driven by engines, distribute electricity to large segments of the population, mine minerals such as iron ore and copper, which were used to make steel and many other products, develop market economies and systems of banking and currency that allow businesses to get loans and to invest their resources. By the 1900s, Europeans, British colonists, and the United States had colonized or controlled large sections of the globe. After 2 world wars, it seemed these empires, as well as Japan, would squander their economic advantage over the rest of the world. They experienced marked economic turndowns, such as the Great Depression of the 1930s. However, they evolved various international organizations and treaties, internal banking systems, and economic policies that allowed them to migrate the economic chaos caused by these events. Large parts of the rest of the world failed to gain access to technology as a result. Their economies remained powered primarily by human labor rather than machines and fossil fuels. Their per capita incomes barely rose. They were victimized by colonists who invaded, plundered, took their lumber and minerals, and killed vast numbers of them with disease to which they had little immunity. By 2000, considerable differences exist among developing nations. We are still talking about the economic gap between developing and developed nations. Some, such as India and China, had made considerable economic progress. Others, such as Bangladesh, had promoted growing numbers of small businesses. Yet others, such as Malawi, remain mired in deep and persistent poverty. Why does globalization harm vulnerable persons in developing nations? Well, the Washington Consensus promoted an economic model of what they call free market capitalism. In other words, free trade should be developed so that Pacific nations specialize in producing only those goods and services where they have a competitive advantage. They should produce these goods not only for internal consumption, but for export. In turn, they should import products from other countries that are produced more efficiently elsewhere. The Washington Consensus favored eventual elimination of tariffs. They believe nations should gradually reduce subsidies and incorporate tax concessions that give their products unfair advantage in a free trade world. They also favored fiscal discipline in government, spending so that nations had relatively little budget deficits and debt, reduction of marginal tax rates, free flow of capital from developed to developing nations, and privatization of public enterprises, developing private property rights. They use international organizations and treaties to pressure developing nations to adapt these economic principles. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, that's the acronym for it, had been created after World War II to rebuild Europe. The World Bank was created to loan money to nations for projects like roads and dams. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, called GATT, was established to promote tariff reduction agreements between nations. However, our presidents try to reincorporate the tariffs on other countries, and they're going to reciprocate by placing tariffs on goods and services to the United States. There's a problem. We shall see how it comes out. The World Trade Organization, called the WTO, was established in 1995 to serve as a forum for trade negotiations between nations and to enforce their decisions through Pacific penalties and fines. Developing nations were faced with a catch-22. In order to stimulate economic growth, they had to invest considerable resources in their infrastructure, which means within themselves. When they sought loans and grants from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, they discovered that these institutions would give them resources only if they cut their spending markedly to reduce their budget deficits. This forced them to cut spending on programs for vulnerable populations and their infrastructures. Always the poor that they look at putting programs aside. That's why the scriptures always tell us the poor will be with you always. It's because they're always keeping them poor. This forced them to cut their spending to these vulnerable populations. These spending cuts increased inequality and curtailed programs needed to stimulate economic growth. Further harmful policies. The IMF and the World Bank pressured some developing nations to privatize publicly held firms, such as banks, energy-producing companies, and utilities. They demanded deep reductions in tariffs, particularly in agriculture, stimulating even greater inequality in developing nations. Corporations that shift their production to these countries also began to focus their sales efforts in these emerging markets. Corporations began to victimize many of their workers in developing nations and could do so because of lax labor standards. This is why a lot of corporations in the United States moved to underdeveloped, and developing countries because of poor or lax labor standards. In China alone, roughly 120 million rural migrants have migrated to urban areas in just the past decade. They chose to move because the economic situation in rural areas is intolerable. Insufficient arable land and jobs exist to support them. Migrants to urban areas in many developing nations have uncertain legal status. They are often denied public education, health care, and other amenities. Another vulnerable population, migrants within and between nations. Massive migration have also occurred between nations. Migrants now constitute about 6% of the populations in rich nations. Most migrants cross borders for economic reasons. Others are refugees or asylum seekers. Many of them are undocumented migrants. Example, they cross borders without the approval of host nations, such as the Mexicans crossing the Rio Grande into the United States and without approval. They are really migrants, not aliens. The situations of undocumented immigrants, they are frequently exploited by employers who pay them low wages and deny them benefits. They find it difficult to access social programs and education. Even when they work and pay taxes, they are often subject to harassment by persons who believe they place downward pressure on wages of naturalized citizens. So globalization impact on the environment. Globalization has contributed to global warming. Scientists differ in their estimates of the rate of global warming. Most agree that the release of carbon dioxide from fossil fuels has led to increase in global temperatures and accelerated the melting of glaciers and ice caps. In addition, globalization has contributed to the depletion of the atmosphere ozone layer, climate change due to the greenhouse effect, and depletion of the Earth's natural resources, such as forests and land. And yes, they are cutting up the forests, what they call the rainforests down in Brazil and other areas. And after a while, we won't have any rainforests to keep the land cool, and we're losing a lot of animals are becoming extinct because of the resources depletion. Some possible scenarios if global warming continues. This is what may happen. If the ocean rise markedly, people in coastal regions would have to evacuate to higher ground, causing mass migrations, industrial losses, and the reduction of ports that undergird the world's economy. The warming of the atmosphere could cause large sections of the globe to have insufficient rain to support agriculture, possibly contributing to widespread famine. The world's oceans and fisheries could be dispersed or disrupted or depleted. In addition, continued industrialization could contribute to depletion of fossil fuel and mineral reserves. This could lead to a meltdown of the world's economy, since it is currently based upon use of fossil fuels. such as coal and oil. Escalating prices for fossil fuels could also incite conflict between nations for control of deposits of oil, gas, and coal. Public health problems such as, so here we have threats to public health. Public health problems such as communicable diseases are not bound by our national borders. Example, SARS, avian flu, and the swine flu, known as H1N1. Infectious diseases remain a leading cause of death globally. I'm going to repeat that. Infectious diseases remain a leading cause of death globally. Many diseases that have been suppressed, such as malaria and tuberculosis, are again on the rise. Nations that face extreme poverty, malnutrition, and lack of access to safe drinking water are even more vulnerable to the spread of disease. So, creating a monoculture. Some argue that a global monoculture generally reflects the values and lifestyles of the United States. Globalization is becoming synonymous with Americanization. American culture products are sweeping the globe. Food, movies, news, television programs, music, etc. Everybody wants to be like America. The great caveat, globalization, positive effects. So here the positive side. Now we discussed the negative side. Let's look at the positive side. Some countries have entered the global economy having experienced overall higher standards of living. Improvements can be seen in a broad range of measures, such as life expectancies, literacy rates and public education, economic output and trade, poverty per capita income and income equality, access to technology, quality of life, example, work hours per year, political participation, example, the right to vote. However, this prosperity has not been shared by everyone or every country. Too many in the developing world, globalization has not brought the promised benefits. So, let's look at policy advocacy for populations harmed by globalization. Policy options in the United States. More resource investment in unskilled workers so that they can rebound when they lose their jobs. Require corporations to give advance notice of their intention to close or move their operation overseas. Pressure United States corporations to establish and enforce minimum wage and work safety standards in developing countries or nations. Amnesty and other legal protections for undocumented migrants. Protection for migrants from victimization by employers and by citizens. Policy options abroad. Pressure the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO to implement policies that do not victimize vulnerable populations in developing nations. Eliminate barriers to imports from developing nations that curtail the well-being of vulnerable populations. Support or work with groups that provide assistance to vulnerable populations in developing nations. Promote human rights as specified by the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, basic rights and freedoms to which all humans are entitled. This is the standard by the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The United Nations Universal Declaration of Rights states, basic rights and freedoms to which all humans are entitled. Additional policy options. Work to increase the amount of foreign aid that the United States gives to developing nations. Pressure the United States to sign treaties like the Kyoto Treaty and successor treaties that commit nations to reduce carbon dioxide emissions that threatens global warming. Pressure the United States to increase its fiscal commitments to public health so that the nation has an infrastructure that can protect Americans from diseases that spread across national boundaries. And that is the end of the show. And we will, the slide presentation, and we will continue with PowerPoint number 6 when we return on Monday. And I hope everyone have a happy Father's Day weekend. And if you have any questions, like I always say, please call me at area code 318-470-2608 or text me at that same number, area code 318-470-2608. If you have any questions or comments, please identify who you are when you text and identify the class that you're in that you have a question on. I will be more than happy to assist you in any way. Like I've always said, I want no one to fail my class, and I want everyone to do their best. And I will help you, but I need you to help me to help you pass my class. Thank you so very much. Have a good weekend. I will see you on Monday. Y'all take care. God bless.